Krishnan is a scientist with a background in psychometric research. His areas of work have included clinical outcome trials in major mental illnesses like schizophrenia and Alzheimer's disease. He is a student of Sanskrit and Vedanta and lives in Staten Island, New York. Krishnan.
Namaste. As Aditi mentioned, the topic of this book is not just about what's happening in America. What happens there and what happens in the intellectual climate there spreads across the world and definitely has an impact on how India is seen around the world. So what I'll do now is I'll just give you a brief overview of what the book is about. What the book records is how such images of India, the kind that Aditi described, how they are produced and how they are propagated. We place particular emphasis on understanding how the structure of the American academia works, and we point out that there are over 8,000 scholars in the American Academy of Religion. So religion is seriously studied as a secular discipline in American universities. Of those 8,000, several hundred study Hinduism, and they study other religions in India. So this book looks at the huge academic establishment controlled by a dominant culture that produces quite a bit of knowledge about your religion and your culture. The next thing the book talks about is the recent intellectual challenge to this state of affairs and what happened afterwards. So in terms of what happened afterwards, we are talking about counterattacks that came from the academic religious studies establishment in America. And I use the word counterattacks advisedly because you'll see the nature of these attacks later. Okay. We also record in this book the results of this ongoing debate, which gives us, for the first time, I think, a systematic critique of the misrepresentation of Indian traditions that's going on in certain sections of the American academia. And the book also serves the purpose of widening the range of ideas and voices in the academy looking at Hinduism. We also hope the book will lead to increased awareness among Indians worldwide, academic scholars and others, and so that there'll be a wider debate about these issues. The book is carved into 4 separate sections, and I'll just walk you through each one of them briefly. We also have an extensive appendix in the back, which also has some remarkable essays. Section 1 of the book is really a summary of 2 groundbreaking essays that came out about 5 years ago, written by Rajiv Malhotra, in which he surveyed the current status of Hinduism studies in America. And he identified 2 types of problems in the American academia. He identified problems with the competence and the training of these scholars in Indian languages and Indian culture. Bernard Lewis, the famous Arabist, says that without deep competence and deep immersion in the language and the culture, a scholar ought not even begin to write. And we find that that's definitely not the case here. Malhotra also identified what he calls peer review cartels, where a few powerful scholars are able to influence through their ability to reward and their ability to punish. They're able to influence whether in fact books are peer reviewed very thoroughly or not. And that's a very serious problem for academic freedom. He also identified the fact that in the study of Hinduism, psychoanalysis was center stage, almost to the exclusion of all other approaches. Now, Alan Rowland, who is a noted psychologist and also is a student of Indian culture, has an essay in this book where he points out that he finds this to be a remarkable trend. It's pretty much only confined to Hinduism, where this very center stage position of psychoanalysis is. Using these approaches and using this lack of training and their cozy relationship with each other, Indian icons, Indian practices are shown to be pathological and destructive. For example, in an introductory textbook on Eastern thought used in many undergraduate schools in America, there's a chapter on Shiva and the chapter on worship in Shiva temples, which makes the claim that these are terrible, dark, strange places, and actually goes on to say that Shiva temples were notorious for ritual rape and murder. This is an introductory book. There are other scholars like Stanley Kurtz, who is quite influential and has many, many people who are taking up his particular scatological approach to understanding India, who claims that Hindu mothers do not form a loving emotional partnership with their babies the way that white women do. Now, this is so, but I do realize that we find this funny, but they find it to be factual. So this is something we should think about. Section 2 records what happened once these essays came out. The essays came out in a cyber magazine called Sulekha.com. Almost 40,000 people downloaded the essay, started talking about it, debating about it. It was as though a large number of scholars in the world were just waiting for this event to happen. We had anthropologists, historians, psychologists starting to write essays analyzing why Malhotra was able to find these biases. They also started looking at some of these texts in greater depth, trying to see if, in fact, the symptoms he has pointed out were borne out. Did they go deeper? And in fact, many of them did conclude that they go deeper, and they also published many learned papers about this. One particular instance that I think is worth mentioning, as Aditi already alluded to, Microsoft Encarta had an extensive essay on Hinduism by Wendy Doniger. Now, Encarta is a very influential encyclopedia. Children all over the world use it. School kids use it, college kids use it. Quick report for the class, you go to Encarta. Now, Sankrant Sanu, who's a scholar from Seattle, did a very systematic point-by-point comparison of Islam, Christianity, and Hinduism to see how each of these religions is treated in Encarta. And his argumentation was so clear and so lucid that Microsoft Encarta actually agreed that there was incredible bias in the Hinduism section, and they actually withdrew it and replaced it with a balanced one. So there are cases where positive engagement with the academia, using their own tools of analysis, actually do bring us great benefits. And so that is really the way that this book is shaping up. We really did think at this point that a true chance for change in self-examination seemed at hand, but then you'll see what happened later because we record that also. But before I go to that, I want to give you a couple more examples of the breakdown of the peer review process that we keep talking about. Now, Aditi mentioned this book, Paul Coatwright's Ganesha, Lord of Obstacles, won a very major award. It's been in print for the last 20 years. It was just recently reissued by Oxford University Press. The award it won was the History of Religions Award given out by the American Council of Learned Societies, one of the best bodies out there. Now, this book was supposedly peer-reviewed, before it got out into the press. But in our book, you'll find an extensive chapter where two scholars named Vishal Agarwal and Kalavai Venkat look at this book very, very carefully and do what peer reviewers are supposed to do. Check facts, check to see whether the theories are sound, check to see whether the conclusions are based on the evidence being presented. And here they find literally dozens of major errors, unverifiable citations, mistranslations, and even what appear to be fabrications. For example, I'm just going to give you two examples. We'll be here all day if I went through this entire thing. Coatwright claims, for example, that Hindu scriptures look upon human beings as being God's excrement. And as proof of this, he cites passages from the Srimad Bhagavatam and also from the Linga Purana. Now, this is something that one can verify, right? So a peer reviewer should go look at the references. And that's exactly what Venkat and Agarwal did. They went to the edition of the Bhagavatam Coatwright used. They went to the Linga Purana edition he used. They went to other critical editions of the book. No such passage, right? The Purana says God that human beings are born from the manas of the universe, of the Lord of the universe personified as God. So where does Coatwright get this from? There's a clue, because apart from listing the Linga Purana and the Bhagavata Purana as his references, he also lists Wendy Doniger's work. And it turns out that all he really did was perpetuate a mistake, an invention that Wendy Doniger had come up with earlier. Next, Coatwright claims that the Devi Bhagavatam records an incestuous rape of the goddess Sati by Daksha Prajapati. Now, this, if it came across the desk of any peer-reviewing scholar, should be a bit of a bombshell, right? I mean, when you see a major claim like that made, you'd imagine that one would scurry to the library and check up the references and make sure this is actually passing muster. But apparently that was not done. And so when you look at the Devi Bhagavata Purana, which Venkat and Agarwal have done, there is no such passage in the Purana. I want you to think about what this means. Such a major claim is made. The peer reviewers are not even activated to make sure that it's accurate. To my mind, it suggests a pervasive atmosphere where it's believed that we Indians, we Hindus, are pretty weird and pretty much anything is possible with us. So it's not worth fact-checking. Just another example of claims that we've exposed in this book. Berkeley Hill in 1921 published an essay also on Kali, apart from the flattest complex one, where he talked about how Kali was the bloodthirsty, menstruating, castrating woman, and this really shows the sexual insecurity of Indian men and so on and so forth. That was back in 1921. Here we have Sarah Caldwell in the 1980s publishing a book saying Kali is first of all a phallic being, mother with a penis. She's a bloodied image of the castrating and menstruating, thus castrating female. Nice circular analysis there. This type of analysis, the phallic abilities of the goddess disguise castration anxieties, ultimately directed towards the father, as well as homosexual desire for the father's penis. Now, this, they will tell you, is, it's arcane analysis, and we really are only using it in some textbooks that really nobody but scholars read, so it's not really going to affect how people think about Hindus and about Hindu goddesses and so on and so forth. Well, in 2007, January of this year, Wendy Doniger writes a nice essay in Washington Post talking about why white women should stay away from the Hindu goddess. This is the theme of the essay. And she says, nor are these goddesses by and large compassionate. They are generally a pretty bloodthirsty lot. Goddesses are not the solution, to stay away from them. So what we see here is that the academic establishment manufactures a certain reality of its own, then that permeates, and they in fact push it out into the public environment. Sections 3 and 4 actually record, like I said, what happened when Malhotra's essay came out, then all the other scholarly responses which deepened and strengthened his arguments came out. You would expect at this point that the academic establishment would say, my God, what have we been doing? How have we been allowing works like this to get out? Works that are not based on fact, works that are based on people who are untrained in psychoanalysis spewing whatever pop psychology that even Cosmopolitan magazine would be embarrassed to print. Why are we letting this happen? But that's really not what happened. I mean, I was actually shocked because I was watching these events unfold, and it was actually very shocking to see what they did. And we have stunning documentation in this book of what the academia did. It was basically a circle the wagons approach, keep out the savages, and use all kinds of ad hominem attacks. Do not address any of the substantive arguments they raise, okay, because that way lays failure for us. So let's just demonize them, wish them out of the way, and we'll be fine. Every critic, including reputed scholars like Jacob de Roo or S.N. Balagangadhara, even Antonio de Nicolas, one of the gentlest human beings I know, were attacked as being agents of the Hindu right. Not only this, the U.S. scholars then managed to go to the U.S. media, and stories started appearing in the Washington Post, in the New York Times, and so on and so forth, linking the scholarly criticism that was taking place in the U.S. with events in India. So this was a time, for example, when a bunch of fanatics went and burned the Bhandarkar Institute over the Lane controversy. So suddenly, the scholars around the world who were criticizing the American academia were now being linked to the burning of the Bhandarkar Institute and to death threats and so on and so forth. So this is another important record that this book provides of how there were some voices trying to restore the debate. There were some voices trying to restore sanity. But by and large, the academia demonstrated this very, very strange herd mentality whereby they were trying to block debate. So that, in a nutshell, is what our book is about. And you will see that everything that we are saying is referenced, footnoted, very carefully checked, and we'll stand by it. And we hope that what this will do is really generate debate. We hope that it'll really inspire more and more Indian scholars to stand up and start questioning what the West has made of us. Thank you.